Hello there guys, and welcome to my build of the Airfix Spitfire Mk XII in 1/48 scale. You might have seen this kit on a few other channels recently, as Jadlam, who are a model retailer in the UK, had it on sale for $14.99 as part of their group build. And in fact the group build is still open, but you've only got until the 1st of November to complete it and send your photos in. And Jadlam have said that everyone who sends in 3 photos of their completed build by that date will get points worth £5 in their store. So I thought the price alone seemed like a bargain. I do use Jadlam fairly often, so the £5 vouchers will come in handy. And it's been a while since I built a 1/48 scale Spitfire. But first a bit of background on the Mk XII. The Mk XII first started appearing in October 1942, and it was the first Spitfire to use the Griffon engine in place of the Merlin engine. This new engine gave excellent low-level and medium-level performance, and the Mk XII was faster than the Mk IX up to about 20,000 feet, when performance started to drop off. The clipped wings of the Mk XII also helped to improve its handling performance. And these two characteristics would become particularly useful later in the war, with the addition of the speed of the Mk XII being very useful for pilots trying to stop V1 flying bombs which were heading towards British cities. And I believe that Mk XII pilots were credited with 82.5 V1 flying bomb kills. Going back to the kit now, you can see we have 2 marking options here on the side of the box, both in the Day Fighter scheme, with the ocean grey and RAF dark green top sides and the sea grey undersides. So we have number 595 Squadron RAF based in Wales, 1945, and number 41 Squadron RAF based in Sussex, England in June 1944. And that second version there you can see has the D-Day invasion stripes still painted on it. This kit is a slightly older kit. It was a new tool in 2011. Although this particular boxing is a re-release with different marking schemes. As you might imagine, the build starts with the cockpit, and when it comes to cockpits I like to build up as much as I can before I get any paint on it, even if that's going to make painting slightly harder in the future. I just prefer to get all the pieces glued together with a nice strong bond first. As I build up the bulkhead, the armour plating and the pilot's seat, you can see I've slightly damaged the top of the piece there with that bar going backwards. That was my fault, I broke it on something. I always find it useful with this type of kit to glue the various frames into place and then just dry fit them into the fuselage to make sure everything still fits and will be nice and square. And as you can see here, this cockpit's built up really well. A good amount of detail, most of which probably won't be seen even with the canopy open, but it does look good. There are a couple of points during this build where we have to cut pieces away from the kit, and this is the first one. If we want the aircraft on the ground, so we want the tail wheel down, we have to cut away these closed wheel doors. Of course, earlier versions of Spitfire didn't have a retractable tail wheel, so that wasn't necessarily an issue on those kits. The places to cut are quite well marked out, so you can carve through them with a hobby knife and then just sand the edges. The second modification comes if we want to have the door open or the canopy open, in which case we have to cut a couple of pieces away, either just the door itself or this piece behind the rear of the cockpit too. I'm going for my canopy open, so I cut both of those away. Once that was done, the entire inside of the fuselage was given a coat of XF1 black, and then a slightly mottled coat of XS71 interior green. The reason I didn't want to go over the black entirely is to give a bit of a pre-shade effect on that and make the cockpit look a little bit dirty. I know there are some ejector pin marks there, but they get covered entirely by the cockpit as it gets added. You can see at the same time I've used the same colours on the inside of the upper wing, so the wheel bay, and those cockpit parts that you saw earlier. Going over everything in interior green made it quite easy for me to simply pick out the different colours with some Vallejo model colour. So the seat here, for example, in a saddle brown colour, and the instrument panel in black. We don't get much of a reference for the cockpit in the instructions, so I use various online reference photos to pick out some of the dials and switches and so on in the cockpit and paint those a slightly different colour. Finally, a very light dry brushing of a metallic colour over the instrument panel makes those details pop out. We don't actually get any decals for the instrument panel in this kit, so short of painting them on, that's the best we're going to get. You can see here I'm using the dry brush with the metallic colour on the cockpit walls and the various cockpit features too, to give a bit of a worn appearance. And then as it slots together, you can see it's a pretty decent looking cockpit there, isn't it? Not too shabby at all, quite happy with this kit. While all that glue and paint was drying and off-gassing, I moved to the exterior of the aircraft. There's surprisingly few parts in this actually. We do need to put a couple of parts on the underside of the wings. They come as this single piece part, which is fantastic. I really like that. There's no issue there getting the wings aligned or anything. On goes this extra fuel tank in the centre. And then really the only thing that distinguishes the nose of the Mark XII from a previous Mark is these raised bulges here, making space for the new engine. Of course, later Griffon powered Spitfires would have a new nose profile, but not this Mark XII. As I found the case on most recent Airfix kits, with this single piece lower wing, putting the fuselage in place and the upper wing pieces is a very smooth process, and generally tends to happen with minimal of gaps. And of course it tends to be better to put all three pieces in at the same time, so that you can get everything aligned and then just leave it all to dry. The horizontal stabilizers were also very well done. A good snug fit there, absolutely no vertical movement in those. No need to check they're aligned while they dry, they just go in perfectly. I did have a problem with this elevator piece, however. There's not a lot of contact point between it and the rest of the tail surfaces, and I did knock it off several times during the build. And equally with the rudder. I do like the way that the tooling of this kit, such as this nose piece here, helps us to avoid too many ugly seam lines. Here you can see the kit after I've given it a coat of Tamiya primer, and the only seam line I really have to deal with is here on the nose. Once that was done, the entire aircraft was given a slightly mottled coat of XF1 black, and the idea behind that was to give a bit of pre-shading, but some variation to hopefully change slightly the top coat. Here you can see that I've used AK Real colours to apply the ocean grey on the top side, roughly in the correct camo pattern, and then the sea grey on the underside. If you watch my channel for a while, you'll know that my favourite way of doing camouflage schemes like this is to use Tamiya masking sheet. This is great stuff. It makes it so much easier than trying to take masking tape and curve it. You simply draw the pattern on that you want and cut it out. If you've got larger instructions that match the scale of the model, then you can trace the instructions, or you can photocopy and blow up these to the model scale. But personally I like to just roughly freehand the patterns that I'm going to see. It's always helpful when doing this to look at the diagrams and line up any panel lines or access ports or things like that as guidance. Here it is once it's done, and you can see along the edge of all that masking tape there is some of the grey colour remaining. That was intentional, because what I don't want to do is have black bits which are not painted either grey or green. So by slightly overspraying the grey, that solves that problem. Here is the Mark XII with the RAF dark green applied, again from AK Real Colours, and I think it's come out rather nicely. I do still want to do a Spitfire in the temperate land scheme, the dark earth and the dark green, and I have got the Tamiya Mark I in the stash, but I do really like this Dayfighter scheme as well. And here's one of the many times that I accidentally detached that elevator at the rear. We do get a decal for the sky identification stripe at the rear, but I decided to mask mine. I found the easiest way to do this is to use some Tamiya 10mm masking tape to actually mark out where the stripe will go, and then apply masking tape alongside that, and then finally remove that initial piece of tape, and you've got the gap where your stripe should go. I do know, however, that the AK Real Colours and the Tamiya Sky Colours don't quite match the colours of the lettering in the decals. The undercarriage legs look nice and sturdy. There's a single piece to take the weight and then just another single piece of detail. We do get the option to have the undercarriage raised, and that involves a slightly different tyre piece, a half tyre piece actually, that just goes into the wheel bay. Now the clear parts on this are slightly strange. We have the option of the cockpit being standard, closed, like you can see on the left here. Or we have an option for it to be open, but when it is, we actually have a separate clear piece here that moulds the rear piece of glass with the front piece of glass sliding over the top of it, all as one piece, if that makes sense. So you can see there it is. That's the single piece for the cockpit, slid back over that rear piece of glass. I'm not quite sure why we have it that way. I'm guessing it's something to just do with scale basically. It's going to be a bit strange painting it because you should have to paint the exterior frame of the rear piece, which would then be underneath the front piece that's slid back over it. But we'll see how that goes. Large parts of the model were given a coat of VMS gloss varnish, ready for the decals. The yellow wingtip edges there I didn't film, but I masked those myself. They're not included in the decal set. There's our walkway lines and our port roundel. There's a slight difference on the starboard walkway line in that it goes all the way here past that inboard walkway line almost up to the fuselage, which is different to the port wing. I don't think that's a mistake. It's indicated on both of the marking options, so maybe that's just fairly standard and I haven't noticed that before. On the underside, my primer here has gone a little bit funny. I should have sanded it a bit more, I think, before I put the paint on, but hopefully I'll get away with that with a bit of weathering. The camera is also making that grey look a lot more blue than it really is. I do prefer to use the decals for the gun cover patches rather than painting them, simply because they were of course actual fabric patches that went over those gun parts. Were they fabric or paper? Can't remember now. This is the port side lettering. I haven't filmed it, but I did mess up the starboard slightly. So basically I just put the V a bit too far forward, too close to the cockpit, forgetting that it doesn't need that much space. You'll see it on the final photos. The exhaust stacks were given a coat of XF1 black, followed by a heavy dry brushing of metallic grey, and to be honest I forget which colour I used. This might have been X10 gunmetal, and then finally I did a lighter dry brushing of a brown colour. This was my first attempt at masking and painting the canopy, And as you can tell, that green I just simply haven't put down thick enough. I didn't think I'd thinned it that much, but it's already looking a little bit yellow now. If we take the masking off, that's not bad masking from me, that's simply that inner green line there represents the green on the lower piece of glass. But yes, that green doesn't quite look right, does it? And if we put it on the model now, you can see, even though it's the same paint, it does not match the dark green that's already on the model. So that's definitely going to need to go back for a new paint job. Once everything was dry, I gave it a coat of my favourite matte varnish, VMS Matte. It really just kills any shine on a model. I absolutely love this stuff. You just got to make sure you clean it out of your airbrush properly, because when it sets, it is an absolute pain to get out. For the panel lines, instead of using oil paint, I decided to use this panel line wash black from Ammo. The main reason I decided to use this is because I bought it a long time ago, I've barely used it, and I'm trying to have a bit of a sort of a clear out of my supplies by using them up. You probably know what it's like when you sort of get into modelling or get into a certain technique. You buy loads of things, in my case, lots of enamel washes and so on, and then you realise a lot of them you don't actually need. I've got so many bottles of different colour enamels, so many pigment powders, I've got so much static grass. But of course these enamels are useful, I just need to remember that they're there rather than buying new oil paints. Generally speaking, I like to do my aircraft fairly clean. So this is essentially the only weathering, if you can call it weathering, that I'm going to do. And any excess there, rather than cleaning it up per se, I'm going to use a brush dampened in odourless thinner and drag it back in the direction of airflow across the wings or the fuselage. And particularly on the underside, that does give a slightly dirtied effect, which is about all I'm looking for. Once that was dried, it was simply a case of adding the canopy and the aerial and so on, and my Spitfire Mk XII was complete. So there we go guys, that was my build of the Airfix 1/48 scale Spitfire Mk XII. I really enjoyed this. I think a combination of getting the kit at a bargain price and having that group build deadline to sort of encourage me to get it done quickly really helped here. But even with the tight time window, I'm really happy with the result here. It's going to look good on my shelf next to my other Spitfires. And the kit itself was a really high quality kit. Really good detail in the cockpit, really nice fit with everything else. I think it was only really that elevator that I had a problem with, and I wonder if that's not because the part was a bit distorted rather than it being like a tooling issue or anything. Anyway, I hope you've also enjoyed this video. I would like to thank you for watching, and of course, special thanks to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members for all the ongoing support that they give to the channel. It is massively appreciated guys, thank you very much. I've got a couple of other projects in the pipeline, including a land-based subject for next time's video. And I've also got what I think are a couple of cool ideas for a winter build. If you would like to see those, then please remember to subscribe if you haven't already. I'd like to thank you again for watching, and until next time, have fun modelling.